So a music company used my introduction music on their introduction and then put some proprietary music after that. And now they're claiming everything is copywritten, including my introduction. Facepalm. Until that's resolved, I'm just going to sing the introduction. Hey, enjoy. Evening, everybody. This is Dr. Hack, and we are going to eat our vegetables today. We're back to the end game. We're going to grow big and strong. Ooh, right? As chess players, you know, we're okay. I got to tell a story. We're going to start off with this. So, my very first chess tournament back in 2002, whatever it was, against my very first opponent, this 1600 guy comes to the board in like this white, tank top shirt with his arms sticking out, and they were big, beefy arms guys. He was some kind of bodybuilder, and he got a massage during the game, and it was super intimidating, and I'm just this scrawny kid. And so I'm sitting there playing against this dude who's like rated 1600, and I'm unrated, and I won the game, guys. And I was afraid for my life. So not stronger, per se like that. Stronger like chess stronger. Good. I'm glad we cleared this up. Let's get to our end game. Jeez. Okay, so we're starting out with rooks today, because in the end game, the rook is the most common piece to have. In Chess Master end games specifically, because those are the ones that I have a chart for, the rook and a minor piece against a rook and a minor piece covers the biggest portion of their end games. It's something like 30%. And if you add the other rook games to it, rooks just dominate the end game, right? There's more times when you'll have one than when you'll not. As amateurs, it's even greater because we don't use our rooks very well in the middle game, and therefore we still have them at the end of the game. Okay, so we're going to learn about the rooks, and we're going to learn specifically when the rook beats a pawn, and more importantly, when a pawn can beat a rook. We need to know that tipping point, because if you know how to beat a rook with your pawn, then you're going to do it, and you're going to save a lot of games. You're going to get draws instead of losses many times when you come to this. And that's what we're on today. Good. So take a look at this position. You're playing white. The pawn is going down the board. And think up 2 different ways that you could win this game as white. Okay. There are, in theory, without moving the pieces at all, we're going to theorize. We're going to theory craft. There are 2 ways to win that pawn. One of them, I guess, is to remember that this is that horsefly, and he's on his Fruit Loop, which is good food for a horsefly, right? And in order to get that Fruit Loop, you're going to have to chase the horsefly away because they bite, right? And so you got to make him move away from the pawn somehow, and then you can step in and win the pawn with one of your pieces. One way is to chase off the defender. The other way would be to bring 2 attackers to attack that pawn simultaneously while the defender was still there. So 2 attackers overpower 1 defender, or you remove the defender and 1 attacker gets the pawn. Those are the only 2 ways in theory to do this. I have an honorable mention, though, for those who watched the last endgame video. Remember, we said if your piece ever sits in front of the pawn, it will never make a queen again. Well, this move will win by attrition. Now you can take your time because you know he can never beat you to work your king up to take the pawn, or to take your rook around and try to cut his king off, or whatever you're going to do. And you'll win, but it'll take a lot of moves. Maybe the faster 2 ways would have been something like this. You give the check, his king has to move away, and then we're in, and we get the pawn. Or perhaps we move the king away so that we can come back closer to the pawn. And no matter what he does, our king is always going to make it in next to the pawn on the next turn. Either it was going there next to the pawn, or it's going here next to the pawn. And we're going to be able to capture the pawn, and then we can win the game with the king and the rook. I'm going to assume that you guys can win the game with the king and a rook. And if you can't, I am sure there is a ton of material out there to help you. Okay. So we go back and we realize that this is clearly winning for white, and there were 2 ways he could do it: removing the defender or bringing both pieces to attack the pawn. Now, how many of you guys know paper, rock, scissors, the game? Or Rochambeau, is what it was called. When one guy says to you, I am going to throw scissors in that game, and then you immediately think to yourself, oh, I should throw rock, I'll win the game. Boom, right? And you do, and you win. That's what we're looking at here. Very simple, right? We know he's going to throw scissors. We are going to throw rock. We know we win. What happens when he says, I am going to throw scissors, and then we stop to think? Maybe overthink. I don't know. And we say, because he said he's going to throw scissors, he clearly is not going to throw scissors. And therefore, we are clearly not going to throw rock. That's what this next position is. We're thinking it one step deeper. He knows that we are going to throw rock because he has said, I am going to throw scissors. So now it's on him to beat rock. So he throws paper. Oh, how confusing can this get? So he has to stop both of our ways from winning. Well, watch this series of moves. If he moves the king in front of the pawn, and remember, we have to get both pieces close to the pawn, so the king should get in there. And then he steps out to this side of the pawn with the king. Look at what that king's doing. He's guarding all of these squares, and our white king can't get through them. And so the white king is going to have to walk around. How many moves does that take? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to get to here, And this pawn only takes 3 moves to win, or to make the queen. That king is way too far away if he does that. So how do we get in then? Let's give a check. And remember, horsefly, Fruit Loop. He's never leaving that thing. And since he's never leaving that thing and he's still standing in our king's way, how are we going to get from here to here? And the answer is we clearly are not. Because any more checks and he's just going to stick close to that pawn. And our king is going to start walking around, and as soon as the king starts walking around, the pawn's going to start moving. And the king just is not fast enough to stop this from happening. It's a slow motion train wreck. So there is a way, it turns out. If he understands what our two winning methods are, and he places his king in such a way that our king cannot get through, then as long as he's still touching his pawn, there's no way for white to win because he can't bring both pieces to attack the pawn, and he also can't chase our king away. Whoa. Okay. Now we get to go one step deeper in the Rochambeau. Now he says, I am going to throw scissors. And we say, we are not going to throw rock. And he says, okay, I'm going to beat rock. And so he gets ready to throw paper, and we say, oh, he's going to throw paper. Therefore, we should throw scissors. So the first guy says, I'm going to throw scissors, and that causes the second guy to throw scissors. Hold the phone. We know what he's up to. He's up to stopping our king from stopping the pawn. He wants to keep our king away from the pawn. He knows what we're up to. Well, how do we stop him from stopping us? From stopping him? From stopping... I don't know how far that goes. Okay, this is black to move. The pawn's trying to get here. Take a minute. What do you do? Well, our king has to approach the pawn in order to make the game end, right? In order to win. And so what if we give him a check? How far away from that pawn can his king move? Let's say it moved here to try to keep the king out as long as it could. Maybe he's too far away now. It takes him 2 moves to get back to defending the pawn again, and he can only make 1 move in 1 turn. Yeah, he's definitely too far away, right? He can't stop us from taking the pawn, even if it moves. So his king can only stay within range. He has to be able to move into these squares to defend the pawn. Let's put it that way. So his king will have to be in a ring somewhere around that to be close enough to save the pawn. So he cannot move here. He cannot move here. He cannot move here. He cannot move here because the king. He cannot move here because the king. He cannot move here because the rook. So really, he's only got these 2 choices, doesn't he? He can move to the left, one of these 2 places. Okay, let's pick one. Oh, guess what? Our king can now step closer to the pawn. Right? And so long as we never let him come back out at this side of the pawn, he will never be able to get in our king's path ever again. Oh, would you look at that? And if we were to put the rook behind the pawn now, or if we were even to try to get the king in front of the pawn now, we would realize that we're in the same position that we were in just a moment ago with the main idea. Our king is sitting in front of the pawn. We can't lose. We're about to chase his king away. That would be a win. And we could just step the king around once the rook's behind the pawn. Let me back up a move. We could just step the king in close to the pawn and win it. Huh. So we did something here. We did something called pushing. That I call pushing. I don't know if anybody else calls it that. We're taking the king from his ideal position to stop us from winning. And then we make it go to the other side of the pawn where we can win again. Cool. So if we know, if he knows, then he's going to win. He's going to, do it right. He's going to get the draw. If we know that he knows, now we have methods of winning again. Oh, these end games, they're hurting my head. It's spinning. It's spinning hard. So I'm going to put a position on the board now. And you guys are going to tell me whether you think the rook can win or whether the pawn will win, which will make the game into a draw. This is black to move. What would you do? The pawn is moving down. Okay. If you said the game will end in a draw if both guys know everything, you're right. That's how it's going to end. But it only ends that way if black plays exactly one move first, one specific move, and it has to be this one. This is the square where he's keeping the white king away from his pawn long enough for the pawn to queen. If you got that, well done. That's without knowing anything about this endgame. This is actually a super difficult calculation for anybody new to this. Okay, even though it's just one move away, and we know from that stepping stone that he's far enough away and he can't get in, and we're going to queen the pawn. Wow, good stuff. I'm going to now do something here. In the same video, right? Normally I would stop here. In the same video, I'm going to add a second pawn to the board against this rook. Because if this pawn can make a draw against the rook, what happens if we have two pawns on the board? Can they ever beat the rook? And the answer to that question is, yeah, they can sometimes. What we're looking at with the kings uninvolved in the position, the pawns are moving down, is the moment, the point of no return. The moment where if white doesn't stop those pawns right now, he will never stop them. How does he do it? How does he stop two pawns from moving into becoming queens with just a rook? Because his king's way too far away. Pause the video if you'd like. White to move. And it turns out there is only one move that does it. Again, if we were to attack, let's say, the pawn that's undefended and try to capture it. Let's try that first. And let's do it from the back because that helps if it moves. Then this one can start to move. And if we capture it, he's still going to get a queen. Oh no, right? And if we do it from the side, he can just move it. And if we do it from the side, he can move either one of those. And when we capture the other one, he's just going to make a queen. Oh no, right? So attacking this pawn or attacking the pawns from the side does absolutely nothing. What we must do is we must attack the lead pawn. And if we attack the lead pawn from the side, it's just going to move. And now we're in trouble again. We come down here to stop it, and now the pawns tag team together to come in here and make a queen. We can take one, but we can never take both. And that's too bad. So now we've got a principle at play. And the principle is rooks work best behind the pawns. Because this rook is attacking not only the lead pawn, but he's attacking every square that lead pawn will move to when it makes a queen. If he was sitting behind this one, he'd be attacking not only this pawn, but he'd be attacking every square in front of that pawn as it moves to make a queen. Rooks work best behind the pawns. Okay, and if we're attacking the lead pawn, neither pawn can move. If this one moves, we capture it. If this one moves, we capture it. And now we've reached a position where these are frozen in place, and we know freezing something in place means we can go attack it. Now we can take our time to walk the king in, capture all this stuff, and win the game. Okay. So that's the point of no return. What happens if this is black's turn? I moved the king a little bit. I apologize for that. But it's black's turn now. Let's say he moves either pawn forward. Let's move this one first. Can we stop it? We can get behind one of those pawns, but it doesn't matter now which one moves. We can never capture one because the other one will always queen. They're just too close to the end. And we get to place a stepping stone in our minds now. 2 pawns connected on the 3rd row for black or on the 6th row for white beats a rook. These are worth, 1 plus 1 equals 5. This is better than a rook. Actually, 1 plus 1 is greater than 5. Don't tell your math teacher. This is Dr. Hack Math. That's why they call me the Hack. Okay. Good. So this is the point of no return. If those pawns connect on the 6th row, that's it. We can't win anymore. I mean, the pawns without the king's help. He didn't even have any help. And the pawns still beat the rook. There is only one way that these pawns don't do that. And that is if this king is sitting in any of these 4 squares in front of those pawns. So we're going to put the king up there and we're going to see what happens. Okay? All right, so we're white. And it's white to move and win this game. And I think the first move, hopefully, is fairly obvious, because if we move the king, we're going to get forked. So it must be a rook move, and we can't move the rook there because we'll get forked. So any of these rook moves actually are perfect. Now, in theory, right, rooks are long-range pieces, so h1 is technically better than g1 because h1 is 1 square further from the king. And he can do the same work from h1 that he could do from g1. But in this case, it actually doesn't matter. If whatever you chose was the right move. So the first thing I suppose we should try is whether or not black can push these pawns and win the game, or try to win. And no matter which one he pushes, what that's going to do is it's going to allow our king to come closer to the pawns. And even though it's tricky, we should be able to find a way now to capture one of those 2 pawns, and while still stopping this one from making a queen. Remember, we can't capture that one at the expense of a queen. Bad news. So maybe the game would go something like this, where we chase the king off, and now we're thinking to ourselves, we could capture it, but he would get a queen. Right? And now we're trying to make a different move, like let's say this one. We're going to capture it with a rook, so our king is still connected. Perfect. Right? We can't capture it now because he'll make a queen, and our king will have to leave, and he'll get our rook. Oh man, this is so tricky. But at the same time, plausible, right? We can win this. Because wherever his king moves, we could have moved the rook anywhere. Wherever his king moves, now we take this with check. Or if his king moves away, now we can take it. And if he makes a queen, we'll just take the queen. There's no way for him to get our rook. We're winning. Sweet. So we go back and we go, can he beat us by moving the pawns? Well, as tricky as that was, the answer is no. He can't. So we put our rook out here, and he doesn't move the pawns. He just kind of marks time with his king. Well, how in the world do we get this, horsefly off of his Fruit Loops? Because our king can't get close enough, so he can't get 2 pieces to attack it at the same time. So we got to get him to leave. And we scratch our heads and we go, well, rooks belong behind the pawns, I guess. So let's put it back here. And then we find one of the more interesting ideas in an endgame, which is, I would say interesting, but if you were talking to me at a party, you would have gone to sleep by now. So not that interesting. Okay, just to clarify. It's called Zwischenzug. No, it's not Zwischenzug. It's called Zugzwang. Yeah, that's the one. It's a move where they have no moves that win anymore. Every single move they can play loses the game. And watch this. Watch this. Every single move he can play loses the game. If he moves the king, we take the pawn. If he moves the pawn, our king's in, and we know how that ends. So he's out of moves. He's out of ideas. If we had put him in check, we could have done that forever and never would have won the game. But the moment we played a move where he wasn't in check, he doesn't have any good moves. He's out. He pushes a pawn, we push it, we go up here, and now we're winning. And we just looked at how this ends. Good stuff. This one is actually very different because our rook's still guarding the queening square, and so we can just take the pawn. That was much easier. Okay, so there, if the king is in front of the pawns, it can be done, but it is hard. We'll leave it at that. You know, you got to know stuff to be able to stop these pawns. So 2 pawns connected on the 3rd row or the 6th row. Very, very good. Worth a draw most of the time. Worth a win a lot of the time too. So good for those pawns. I am going to give you one final position. Okay, so here's the position. And this was from a game that I played in Chicago in 2007 against a very young player. I think he was probably 10, maybe 11 years old, I would guess, but he was rated 1800, so he was very strong, right? Very strong for his age. And my last move was to capture a piece here. I can't remember what it was. It probably was a knight or a bishop. And his last move was to move the rook down to pin my queen to my king. And I knew when I captured that minor piece that this was going to be the position. But I also knew that I could win from here. This is white to move. What do you do? If you said move either of these pawns, you're correct. Because we know that after these 2 leave the board, the piece that's left is the king and the rook, and the rook cannot stop 2 pawns that are connected on the 6th row. So we get closer to that eventuality by moving one of these pawns. And if he gives checks and tries to get behind our pawns, that's fine, right? Because our king is now able to move up and help 1 pawn get up to make a queen, right? We could even, I suppose, walk in here and start to advance the b pawn. Now they're connected on the 6th row. His king is not in front of them. There's no way he can possibly stop us from making a queen. White wins the game. If you got all that, congratulations. It's about these 2 pieces and how they connect on the 3rd row. I sincerely hope this helps somebody. You guys have a great weekend. Take care now. Bye.